v.h.s.x? What do you mean?
Alright everybody, welcome back to a brand new video. Today I wanted to react and have a discussion about a video from DaBrownie titled Survivors versus Killers, Who's More Toxic? So I'm interested in this topic. I have spoken about different aspects of the topic like this in the past in many different videos. And here we are again to kind of talk about it again and kind of see what somebody else has to say about this topic, because I have covered something like this before. I have covered the double standard and sort of the expectations from killers versus the expectations from survivors and things like that. So I do want to hear what else somebody's perspective on that would be compared to my own. So let's get into it.
All right, so it turns out that survivors are the more toxic role by far, and it's not even close. Now, I obviously knew this already. It's pretty obvious if you're a killer main. Survivors are way more toxic. You see it in game all the time. You see it on social media and the forums all the time. It's pretty obvious. But I wanted to make a video out of it so that way nobody could just deny it, right?
Well, you heard it here, folks. We have somebody else who, once again, kind of says what we already know. Survivors tend to just objectively be more toxic than killers pretty much every step of the way. And that's just it. That's just how the community is, unfortunately. I'm not saying that it's all survivors, but the few that are toxic are usually the loudest and usually the most common. So, you know, there's obviously fantastic survivor players out there that are very wonderful people. You probably have seen me interact with them on streams or things like that. I've collaborated as well with survivor players that are fantastic people, as you can see with many examples. I mean, that's why even, you know, the whole quote toxic TTV content even exists. It's because of the fact that it's so common within the community for survivor teams to be very toxic.
You do see people saying that killers are more toxic. You see people saying survivors are more toxic. If you have a brain cell and you pay attention to this game, survivors are the more toxic role by far, and it's not even close. So I played 20 matches, all of which you can see in the background, the survivors being toxic. And it turns out out of 20 matches, 17 of them featured toxic survivors. Now, whether that be them bitching in endgame chat, insulting me, teabagging mid-match, things like that. I did tunnel in one match, and I did slug in another match. So if you wanted...
So I will say one thing to kind of add on to what Brownie here is saying, is the fact that he ran about 20 matches, he plays Huntress, and it seems like they, at 17 out of the 20 were usually filled with a toxic endgame chat. And obviously it does beg the question, what is considered toxic by the metrics? You know what I mean? Like, if you're talking about, is teabagging toxic, or is like the emoting or whatever have you toxic, technically speaking? And that in itself can be considered its own discussion. Like, is that considered toxic, or is that what you deem it to be to even have this conversation? But usually when you are engaging in an action like trying to crouch spam, we'll say, trying to point or trying to do stuff like that, or even like in the end game chat complaining, 9 times out of 10 it's usually deriving from frustration or trying to you know, talk trash, if you will, which I've covered that in a previous video as well. But obviously it's really up to interpretation. If it's just bagging just to get people to try to chase you, but obviously at the end game you're not really saying anything beyond just like, hey, GG's or whatever the hell, that I would say that's perfectly valid. Obviously, you know, I've had a lot of matches where people were teabagging and then they would get folded when I was like minutes after. Like, I would be chasing people, they teabag, and then they would just get instantly folded like an omelet, and it was pretty funny to me. But I have to say though, I mean, it does kind of speak for itself. We are seeing multiple examples, and that's obviously even why the toxic TTV stuff even exists. And then I can also add on to the fact that, you know, these players here are running full meta. Like, this is stuff that I'm even seeing on my own matches when I play killer. I'm usually seeing P100s, P30s, P50s, P60s, and they're usually running, you know, dead hard, decisive, dead hard, you know, well, I already said dead hard, but they're usually running dead hard, decisive, resilience, resurgence, deja vu, you know, finesse, vigil. So like all that stuff is pretty meta. So these people are definitely not any slouches by any means from what I can understand here. These builds are pretty advanced. I wouldn't see builds like these on more casual or average or more casuals or average players in my opinion, or it would be less common.
Discount those, that's fine. That makes it 15 out of 20, which I believe is 75% or 70%. I don't know, I'm terrible at math. But then when we get to the survivor side of things, it gets interesting. One killer was toxic out of 15 possible killers. And that is this plague right here. And I don't even know if she's being toxic, to be honest. She downs the Daryl and starts swinging at him and puking all over him. I'm counting it as toxic, but I don't know. I kind of think they were goofing around because he's like wobbling around and stuff, but I'm just going to count it as toxic, right? And then not only that, in the 15 survivor matches that I played, half of the matches featured a toxic survivor. For example, this Thalita, thankfully she's on anonymous mode, she hid the whole match, didn't do anything, and then she proceeds to hide on the hatch, teabagging for 2 minutes straight. 2 minutes straight. I did come to the conclusion also that survivors are far more likely to be toxic when they win.
Yep, this is pretty much something I've seen before. When I played Killer, I've seen it happen. Even recently, stuff like that. And yeah, no, I 100% agree that a lot of Survivor players can do that. They can be very toxic when they win games, and I've had plenty of games like that as well. Like I will, you could be having a bad game for whatever reason, and immediately in the end game chat, you're gonna get berated for it if you're playing a Killer. Especially if you're a P100 as well, you'll just get berated, because you just had a bad game, and it's like, okay, like you're not gonna. I mean, obviously with the game's balancing, you're not gonna win every single game, and that's just how it works,
A lot of the times, if you win as Killer, survivors aren't really toxic. They will be in in-game chat, but they usually don't teabag. I figure that's because they're kind of trying to lock in and they really can't afford to be toxic in that way. But this is the only match that I have. There were, like I said, there were 3 matches with nice survivors. This was one of them. This is the only one I have recorded. I missed a few of those nice matches just because I wasn't even going to record them at first. I was just going to tell you about them. But these guys, they didn't stay. They didn't shine me with flashlights. They didn't try to make me whiff or anything. They just left immediately. And actually, in the end-game chat, they were very sweet about it. And I was actually shocked because every single time I've been 4-man outed, I got teabagged. And when I was playing Trapper, I was purposely losing every single match because it's like, that's the most likely time survivors are to teabag. And these guys actually didn't teabag. And I was actually legitimately shocked. I had played 9 matches in a row. Every single match featured a toxic survivor, and these guys were all nice. So I was like, wow. So there are some nice like Swifts out there, I guess.
Yeah, that is the point that I'm also trying to make as well, that it's not every single survivor in the entire community that does that. The only problem is that you can have like 1 or 2 matches where people are just playing and moving on to their next game, saying a GG and calling it a day. But the thing is that you're not even going to remember that, obviously, because it's going to be much more on average. You're going to have much more toxic teams. You're going to have much more toxic Swifts. You're going to have much more bagging than you are going to have nice games. And, I'm not sure if that is an MMR thing. I don't know if that's just like, bias or whatever have you could say. But on average, you just, like, I mean, obviously from the video here, the math kind of speaks for itself. About in a sample size of 20 games, about 17 of them had bagging and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know, right? I mean, you could say that it's not that common, but even if you can say that, a lot of people will not even try to even think of that because it's just simply easier to remember a negative experience when it happens more often than a positive experience.
I think this was a Swift. I don't know. But needless to say, you get to the survivor matches here. Not a single killer is toxic. I have all the matches. If anybody wants me to post them all, it would be probably like a 10-hour video. So I don't know when I'd actually be able to get around to it, but yeah. And also, we actually got 2 nice killers that actually let us escape. That being a Wesker and a Bubba who was just protecting his little chest in the basement. So that's why we died. We could have all left, but we decided not to. We were messing around with the Bubba. And then we get to another situation where a survivor is just being an absolute baby because they got hooked 2 times back to back. So they throw a completely winnable game and just decide not to play anymore. So, you know, again, that throwing a game is toxic. Oh, also one of the matches I have over here is the clown match. I do consider this toxic. 3 survivors DC'd and left me and this David to play together. Yeah, DCing because you don't like a killer is toxic in my opinion. You click play the game and then you just decide you don't want to play against a certain killer. I don't care what state the killer's in. You're DCing. You're leaving one survivor with it. You know, that's toxic in my opinion.
I have to just completely agree with that point, honestly. I mean, yeah, like, because it's a bit unfair to everyone else playing because then nobody else can have a good match, right? Like, they don't even have a fighting chance because you have teammates just immediately flying out. Like, that is a bit toxic. I will agree with that. Regardless of the killer, right? Regardless, I mean, it's just a bit unfair to everybody involved because there's probably like a couple of people in that lobby that are like, yo, I would have wanted to just play a match. And obviously there's also people with, you know, without a lot of free time that just want to play a couple matches and then they aren't really able to at least get a full match in, which is unfortunate for them as well. And then obviously the killer player doesn't get to play a normal game either because it's against a bunch of bots. If the killer wanted to do that, they'd load up a custom. So, a bit unfair with that
opinion. What is it, 35 games in total, and we're looking at 24 of the games featuring a toxic survivor. 17 out of 20 of my killer games featured a toxic survivor, and it was about half of the 15 games, about 7 games on the survivor side where there was also an additional toxic survivor, and one single killer was toxic out of the 15 games. So I kind of just wanted to make a video about this just for everybody to see. Now, I don't know why survivors are so toxic. I don't know what draws them to this role, but generally survivors, I'm not even going to say the majority of survivors are toxic because, like I said, out of 120 survivors, probably only 40 to 50 of them were actually toxic. A lot of the others were just bystanders who just left, while the others were teabagging it.
I think objectively, on average, you're going to see a ton more toxic survivors than killers, just mathematically, because there's obviously 4 compared to the 1. So mathematically speaking, survivors are always going to have more toxic players on average. If we're talking about just comparing who objectively would be more toxic in the first place, it's usually survivors, in my opinion. Just going off of what I've seen and obviously what I've gone up against in all my time playing, what I've seen, what I've heard and stuff like that. And obviously, even with the data given here in the sample size of the 20 matches, 17 out of 20 toxic survivors every time. We can also look at forums, we can look at DB Twitter, we can look at multiple different things within the community, and even my own videos that I've talked about in the past as well. The point still stands, like the survivors are objectively going to be more toxic, comparatively. Now, obviously, I'm not saying all, I'm just saying that the few you could say that are toxic are usually the ones that you're going to see more of, I would say. So, with that point being said, I do want to see if there's anything else here.
Things like that. So I'm in no way trying to say that all survivors are toxic, but survivors are the more toxic role by far. It's not even close. And you can just see this in the content if you look on TikTok, on YouTube. It's always clips of survivors bullying killers, and I guess I kind of get it to a degree.
That's 100% correct, actually. I've actually, recently I've been posting on TikTok, so if you guys want to watch that, it's linked in the description. But I have recently been looking at the platform, trying to kind of understand what content, all that kind of stuff. And that's usually what I see as well. I mean, you can see that in YouTube Shorts as well. I've seen that on YouTube videos. A lot of the time, it's usually trying to bully like very low skilled killers and stuff like that. a lot of the content is very focused, especially a lot of survivor content is very focused on trying to make fun of the killer for their lack of ability and stuff like that. And you know, it's usually filled with, at least from what I've seen, right? Obviously, just when I've been recommended in the past, it's just usually a lot, like tons of like really fast editing, tons of sound effects, like tons of things, like very fast-paced editing, very brain rot, if you will. A lot of memes implemented in there and stuff like that. And you know, it's not really my sort of flavor for content, in my opinion. I don't really think it's for me. I think it's kind of, it doesn't really interest me much. And this mainly goes to say that the culture within the survivor community is seemingly very negative, I would say. Like, at least like when I've seen killer content, it's usually pretty positive or pretty neutral, or very focused on trying to improve at their killer, or trying to show new things to learn, at least from what I've seen, right? And even speaking for myself, when I was posting you know, more gameplay content, it had mainly to focus on improving, you know, understanding the game, how to counter certain things and stuff like that. And then on the other side of the coin, when we see survivor content, it's mainly just focused on, you know, basically berating the killer, trying to bully the killer in some kind of way, usually exploiting an aspect of the game that can't be countered, things like that. And I've seen that myself, right? So, and you know, I'm not obviously going to put out any names of creators or anything like that to kind of give examples, because, you know, I don't need it to kind of seem like a witch hunt or seem like, you know, negative, but like for their content, because that's what they want to create. But it's just adding to that culture within the DVD community, which obviously, on the other hand, you also have the toxic TTV stuff like that you see on the killer end as well. So you could potentially argue that it goes both ways in that sense, but still. So anyway, I wanted to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I wanted to give my final thoughts mainly. A video like this, I feel like, was kind of a no-brainer. Are survivors versus killers, who's more toxic? I mean, we already knew that was from the get-go. But shout out to the survivor players that are not a part of those people, not a part of that group. Just like in the other side of the coin, shout out to the killer mains that are also on the, you know, normal side of the coin, that isn't trying to create a bad experience for everybody involved and just wants to have fun with the game and enjoy themselves. And it goes both ways, obviously. But with that being said, obviously, if you enjoyed it, check out the description for the original video. Maybe click on the other videos, check out those links, man. Support the channel with the links in the description. And follow on TikTok and Twitch to watch me play Killer live on the Twitch. And YouTube, hit that sub button. I'll see you guys in the next one.